Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 4 player game Maglev Metro, designed by Ted Alspach and published by Bezier Games, who helped sponsor this video. Let's be honest, in the future, robots will be doing most of our work for us. Except for teaching board games, that should always be done by a human. However, when you're trying to convert old rail systems into brand new ways to travel using magnetic levitation, robots are quite useful, or so this game has told me, and you'll be the hero of the century if you can figure out how to make them do it. Time to start working on your plans because others won't be far behind. So join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, we'll assume we have 2 players in this video, and each now collects a train in their chosen color, along with the matching colored player board and track tiles. Next, find these 4 bonus decks and sort them by their backs, giving them each a good shuffle. Every player is dealt 1 card from each of these decks, and you can always look at your own cards, but keep them a secret from the other players. And if this is your very first game, they recommend not using the red back deck, so we'll return that to the box, along with any remaining undealt bonus cards. Now pick a start player randomly and give them this start player token. These are the passenger pieces in their various colors. Now, in a 4-player game, you use all of the passengers. In a 3-player game, remove 3 of each color. And with 2 players, as we have here, you'll remove 5. Again, 5 from each of the colors. The gold, steel, and copper pieces are known as worker robots, and every player now collects 1 of each of them, which they'll keep by their player board. Now, in a 4-player game, the 4th player also gets 1 extra robot in the color of their choice. Now it's time to piece together the main board, which has 2 sides. One shows Manhattan Subway, and the other shows Berlin Metro. Each plays differently, and you can refer to this section of the rulebook to learn their differences. But for this video, we'll use Berlin. With the map on the table, find a factory, warehouse, and lab station, and then randomly place them into these 3 recessed areas of the board. Based on this chart from the rulebook, add a number of robots to the 3 stations based on your number of players. We add a copper and gold to the factory, steel and copper to the warehouse, and a steel and gold robot to the lab. Now, you can stand these up, but for this video, I'm going to lay them down. All your leftover stations you set into the spaces for them at the bottom of the board, so it looks like this when you're done. Then from the supply, set a matching colored robot onto each of these 3 stations. All the rest of the robots, which remember are just the copper, steel, and gold passengers, you'll mix into the included cloth bag. All of the remaining recessed spaces of the board will show some number of these 3-colored robot icons. And for each of these symbols that you see, you'll draw a random robot from the bag and then place it into that space. And when you're done, it will look something like this. Now sort all of the remaining passengers into their 4 color groups. These passengers are known as commuters, and you'll set them beside their matching colored stations here at the bottom of the board. Then as a final step, set a single matching colored commuter on top of each one of these stations as I've done here. And that's the setup. In Maglev Metro, you'll be placing tracks and delivering passengers to their desired locations, using robots and commuters to improve your actions, many of which will earn you points at the end of the game. And the player with most points will win. The game is played over a series of turns, beginning with the start player who holds this token. When using the Berlin map, on their very first turn, they take their train and add it to one of these 3 starting stations, and then they collect 1 robot from the station that they chose. After the first player goes, each other player takes a turn in clockwise order, adding their train to a station and collecting a robot. And they can go to a station another player has already placed their train on. Once everyone has taken a turn, we come back to the first player, who now performs their second turn. Here, they begin by placing all of the robots that they have onto their player board. Now, this includes the robot that they just gained from their first turn, and the ones that they were given during the setup. There are 2 types of passengers in the game. Robot workers, which are copper, steel, and gold, and commuters, which are made up of the remaining colors. When these are added to your player board, they'll enhance the actions and scoring opportunities you'll have. You won't start the game with any commuters, but as you gain them later, you can set them into any empty space that matches their color. So if I had these, I might put this coral one here, maybe this purple one here, a pink one down here, and also pay attention to these spaces, which each show all 4 of the commuter colors. That means you can place any commuter into those spaces. And we'll see why you might want to put these into certain locations later, but robot workers are added in a similar way, assigning them to any open matching colored spaces. But when it comes to this middle column, there are some restrictions. First, every one of these rows with an arrow in it are already considered to have a robot worker assigned to them, as represented by these icons. Any new robots you add to these rows can go in any order, but you must always fill them in from left to right. Some spaces, like this first one here, will show all 3 robot colors in it. That means any type of robot can fill in that space. While other spaces show specific colors. In this case, it shows silver, so only a silver robot could go here. We'll learn how you gain more robots and commuters to place on your board a little later. But as I was saying earlier, on your second turn of the game, you'll first add all of the robots you have to valid spaces of your board, and then, with them placed, you perform 2 actions. These symbols at the top of your board remind you that on each of your turns you can always perform up to 2 actions, though you can perform fewer if you'd like. After you perform your actions, the next player goes. Any robots that they haven't placed, they'll now add to their board, and then they take 2 actions. And turns will continue like this around and around the table until the game ends. And we'll learn how it ends a little later. For now though, let's learn the types of actions you can perform on your turn. The types are shown on your board in this middle column, and there are 8 to pick from. Track, move, pick up, drop off, refill station, adjust, build station, and reverse train. Capacity here isn't an action, but can affect other actions, as we'll see later. Speaking of which, when you perform an action, its strength is represented by the number of robots you have on that action's row. This is also known as its units per action, and most will start with 1 robot automatically filled in. So right now, I have 2 units in the track action. If these 2 robots were added here later, I'd now have 4 units in the track action. We're going to go through each action and see how they work. But keep in mind, when performing your 2 actions on a turn, they can be the same actions or different ones. Let's start by learning the track action, which allows you to build and/or remove your track tiles. Each player has tiles made up of several straight tracks and some curved ones. And although these curves look slightly different, they're actually drawn to the same hex edges. And we'll see why that matters a little bit later. To build a track, place any 1 tile from your supply onto any space at the end of what is known as your line. At the start of the game, your line is just the space your train is on. So as the blue player, I can add a track to any space adjacent to this station. But the path printed on the tile must connect to the side of the station itself. I couldn't, for example, rotate it this way. With this new tile placed, the end of my line is now still here at this station or at the end of this track tile extending in this direction. So if I wanted to continue the track on this end, I would have to make sure that the path added here connects to this path. And I didn't have to make the line straight. If I'd wanted to, I could have added this curved piece. And also, when placing your tiles, you can rotate them as you like to create the paths that you want. You'll also find large and small versions of your curves, and this allows you to ensure that your tracks line up correctly when going from one tile to another. For example, we can see here these paths don't quite connect. But if we instead had used this curved tile, now they would. I should also point out that while you can never have more than one of your own tiles in the same space, any number of different players' tracks can share the same space. So for example, this would be legal. In games with more players, once you get several tracks overlapping, you may find that one color gets covered up by another. If so, you will find there are alternative ways of arranging the tiles so you can create the exact same paths without hiding any. So always make those adjustments when necessary. Now I had said that when adding track, new pieces must be added to either ends of your line. But if one of your ends is a station, you can have at most 2 of your lines coming out of it. So I could, for example, add one here. Now I have 2 of my tracks adjacent to this station, and that means I could not add a third. But other players could still add tracks out of this station.
Anytime you add a track tile to the board, it will cost you 1 unit of your action if the space only contains land. If any part of the space contains water, then it will cost you 2 units. The blue player currently has assigned robots to their track to give them 3 units per track action. So that means they could place 1, 2, 3 tracks with that 1 action as long as they all go on land spaces. Or instead, they might add 1 over a water space, which will cost them 2 units of their action, leaving them with 1 left over to place a track on land.
You never have to spend all the units you have in an action if you don't want to. And you can also spend units to remove your own tracks from the board with this action if you want.
When removing track, it must also come from the ends of your line, and the cost is the same as the cost to build track. So to remove this piece of track from this water space would cost me 2 units of that action. You can remove a line that connects to a station. For example, technically, this is the end of this part of my line, but I can still remove this section of track. I could not, however, remove this piece of track, because you can't break up your line if it means your train no longer has access to some part of it. So this piece would have to stay in play for now. As we'll see later, new stations can be added to these recessed areas of the board. But while the space is empty, it has no station. And although you can still build a line to one of these empty recessed spaces, you cannot continue your line from it. So placing a track here would not be allowed. It is possible to build your line so that it forms a loop like we see here. Now, you won't be able to add any new track to it while it's a loop, but with the track action, you can remove any part of the track, and then you can add new track to the open end that creates.
Also, keep in mind that the track tiles you have are limited. If you ever run out of a certain shape you want to use, you'll need to pay to remove some of those pieces from one end of your line so you can build them on the other end. Okay, that covers the track action, where you can add and or remove tracks on your line. And why are we building tracks? Well, we're going to use them to pick up passengers and then take them with our train to places they want to go. And with that in mind, let's take a look at the pick up passengers action. At the beginning of the game, you can only pick up robots, and right now, those are the only types of passengers on the board anyway. We'll see how commuters get added and how you can unlock the ability to pick them up a little later.
The number of units you have in this pickup action will indicate how many passengers you can load onto your train at its location. So in this case, up to 2. However, notice you also have a capacity rating on your player board, and this indicates how many total passengers you can have in your train at any one time. So although I'm technically allowed to pick up 2 passengers with this action, I can only keep one of them in my train. So in a way, really, I can only pick up 1 because of the capacity limit. So let's instead pretend that our capacity was actually 2. This means now I could pick any 2 passengers at my train's station and add them to my train, which in this case would put me at capacity.
Just so it's clear, throughout this video, I'm going to be adding stations and tracks and passengers to the board that aren't necessarily there at the beginning of the game, but I'll be doing this so I can show you various helpful examples, so just keep that in mind.
If you ever pick up passengers with a future action while you're already at your capacity, just remove any from your train as you like, returning them to that station. And if any match that station's color, they are instead immediately returned to the bag. You then pick up the replacement passengers you wanted and put them in your train.
With that understood, now let's learn the move action. And the number of robots you have assigned to that action on your board, again, provides you with a certain number of units for that action.
Each unit you have allows you to move from the station your train is currently on to the next station on your line, bringing all of the passengers already in your train along with you. If it's your very first move of the game, you first turn your train to face the track you want to travel on, and then you drive along its path to its destination. If you have remaining units of movement left for that action, you can then travel to the next station on the line if you want. A set of track tiles connecting 2 stations is called a link. And if your track ever ends where there's no station, that's not a complete link, and you can't travel on that section of track.
Just keep in mind your train can only travel on your own colored track. You can't travel on another player's track.
As you move, you must always keep your train pointing in the direction your train can next move in. You can't turn around in the middle of your move. However, if you reach the end of your line, which in this case, this would be the end of the blue player's line, because although their line extends in this direction, it does not lead to another station. So this is the end of the line. And if you get to the end of your line and you still have move units left to spend and want to keep moving, you automatically do get to turn around for free and face the other direction. And then you spend the next unit of move you have to go to the next station. If you ever end your move at the end of your line, leave it facing in its current direction. If when you want to move again, you've already added track that connects to a new station, then your next move must continue in that direction. If you don't already have new track added when you start your move and you're at the end of your line, you instead get to turn around for free and then you can start spending units of your move again. You don't have to move the full distance you're allowed to go, but if you stop a move to perform another action, maybe to pick up passengers or really anything else, then you lose any units of movement you had left over. Okay, so now we know how to build track, pick up passengers, and move. Now let's learn how we can change direction. You can only perform this action once you've added a robot to this action space. And from that point on, you can now use an action to change the direction of your train, even if it's not at the end of its line. But just keep in mind, if you were moving and then chose to reverse your train, that ends the move action you were just performing. All right, now let's learn about dropping off passengers. First, check to see how many action units you have, and we'll assume we have 2. For each unit, you can remove a passenger from your train that matches the color of the station your train is currently on. So, although I could drop off 2 passengers, only one of these matches the color of the station, so I can only remove this gold robot. After dropping off a passenger, instead of placing it on the station, you add it directly to a valid empty space of your player board that matches its color. This is how you gain new units for your various actions or unlock new abilities that we'll go over later. Anytime you want to add robots to a units per action column, you can add them to the left or right of any robots already there, as long as all robots match the colors underneath them. So I could put this gold one right into here, pushing the silver one to the right, because the silver one still matches the space underneath of it, and so does the gold one. You gain any benefits from a newly added passenger the very next time you would perform the related action, whether during this turn or a future one. Just keep in mind, if you added a dropped-off passenger to the drop-off action, you don't get the benefit of this new unit during the current drop-off action that you're resolving right now. We should take a moment and look at some of the other abilities dropped-off passengers can unlock. For example, if you fill in a complete row in this section of your board, you gain an extra action that you can perform on your turn. Now, normally, you can perform up to 2 actions per turn, but now we can perform up to 3. And if these other 2 rows were also filled in, we'd be able to perform up to 5 actions per turn. If you ever complete a full column in this area of your board, you unlock the ability to build a station matching the color shown at the top of the related column. And you'll also be able to now pick up and drop off passengers of that station's color. So if this column was filled in, we have now unlocked our ability to build pink stations and pick up and drop off pink passengers. Speaking of which, let's talk now about how stations are built, which uses this action. However, you can't take this action until you've unlocked it by adding a robot here. So let's assume that we have. To take this action, you need to have track already built to a recessed space on the map, and then you can build a colored station there that you have access to. At the beginning of the game, all players have access to the gold, copper, and steel stations. So we could take any one of these and add it to this recessed space. First though, the player who's building the station takes the passenger that was placed on it during the setup and then adds it directly to any valid space on their player board. This is a bonus they get for constructing the station. Then they add the station to the board. Any robots already in that space are moved onto the new station. However, if any of them match the color of the station, put those robots back into the bag. When building a station, as we saw, if you filled in any one of these columns with the required passengers, you can build one of these types of stations instead. So we could, with this column filled in, build a station in the lilac color. To do that, you'd take a station of that color from the bottom of the board here, again adding the passenger on it to your own board, and then you'd set that into the recessed space of the board that you're building into. If this is the very first time a station of a particular color is being added to the board, you now collect all of the commuters that match its color that had been in a supply at the bottom of the board and put them into the bag. And that covers the build station action. And now that we're holding the bag, let's discuss the refill station action. As usual, check the number of units you have to use when performing this action, and for each one, 2 in this case, you draw an equal number of passengers randomly from the bag and add them to the station where your train is currently located. But don't add any that match the color of your current station. Instead, set them aside and then draw replacements. Once you have valid passengers, return any set-aside ones back to the bag. Now add the new ones you drew to the station. Not counting any already in trains, each station can hold a total of 8 passengers. And you may not draw more passengers than this limit. Let's say we already had 7 passengers on a station and were able to draw 3 as part of our refill station action. We would actually only get to take a single one from the bag, adding it to the station, and then we'd have to stop since we're at the maximum number of 8. If you ever need to draw more passengers than there are in the bag, just draw as many as you can. And if the only passengers left in the bag are ones that match the color of the station you're performing this action on, then return all of them to the bag, cancel your refill action, and perform a different action instead. Now I should mention, any player can look at the contents of the bag at any time, but must ensure they give the bag a good mix after and cannot look in the bag anytime they're actually taking passengers from it. All right, now let's learn the adjust action. Again, check how many units are assigned to that action, and for each one, you can shift one robot on your board to a new slot. Notice I said shift robots. You cannot rearrange commuters on your board with this action, only robots. When adjusting, remove all of the robots that you plan to adjust and then put them back on the board in the way that you want. Keeping in mind, you can add robots to any positions within the action rows as long as they match the colors required under their pieces. Also note, you could use this action to adjust robots so that you've unlocked a new extra action, and then you get that new extra action this turn. Also, if when adjusting you reduce your capacity with an adjustment, and this means you're now carrying more passengers than you're allowed, you remove any of your choosing from the train to match your new limit. And if any of these passengers match the color of the station, you must immediately put them into the bag. If adjusting passengers on your board means that you lose the ability to carry and move passengers of a color that you already have in your train, you must immediately move them from your train. And if they match the color of the station that they're currently in, they are then sent straight to the bag. And that covers all of the actions that you can take on your turn. So now let's go over a rule related to one of them that wouldn't have made much sense if I'd tried to explain it earlier. We had mentioned that to build stations or pick up and drop off commuters, you must have their specific colors unlocked on your board here. But just know, even if you don't have a color unlocked, let's say purple in this case, you can still build track to that colored station and move your train to it, which can allow you to use the pickup action to load passengers there from colors that you do have unlocked. I should mention we haven't specifically discussed this area of your board, but you can place commuters here, and these will help you score points at the end of the game, as we'll see. Speaking of which, once a player is finished performing their actions, the next player in clockwise order goes. And turns will continue clockwise around and around the table until at least one station of each of the 4 different commuter colors has been built. At that point, all of the commuter pieces will have been added to the bag, and then turns will continue as normal. But after that point, once the bag is empty at the end of a player's turn, the end of the game is triggered. Even if someone performs an action that would then add passengers back into the bag at that point, the end of the game has been triggered and you'll now just finish the round. That is, you'll take turns until you get back to the person who's holding the first player token. Then you play one more full round of turns, and then the game ends and it's time for final scoring. Use the included score pad for this, and you begin by gaining 1 point for every pink and lilac colored commuter anywhere on your player board. Then score 2 points for every coral and purple commuter there as well. And remember, you score these points no matter where these commuters are on your player board. You'll find a reminder of their score values printed on the matching commuter colors here. And if you have any of these columns completely filled in, as we do here for coral, then as shown at the bottom, you'll score a bonus victory point for each commuter of that color anywhere on your player board. So in this case, all of my coral commuters would score me 2 victory points plus 1 additional victory point, or 3 victory points each. Now look at the main board and score 1 point for every link you've built between complete stations, no matter how many tiles make up each link. So for example, as the blue player, I have a link here, 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 and here. That's a total of 7 links, so I'd earn 7 points. On your player board, for each of these rows that you've filled in, you earn an additional point for each of the links that you scored. So in this case, I'd earn 2 extra points for each of my links. Now reveal your bonus VP cards, and these each have various ways to earn points at the end of the game based on what you've accomplished. Any that give points for tracks only give points for tracks you've built. And determine which of these bonus cards has earned you the most points, and then add only that value to your score. Then check this area of your board, and for each row that you've completed here, you may pick one of your other VP cards and score that as well. So in this case, I'd score any one of my other bonus cards if I satisfied its conditions. Now the player with the most points wins, and in the case of a tie, the tied player with the fewest robots on their player board wins. And if there's still a tie, the players can share the victory or play another game and see if the tie can be broken that way. When you're more familiar with the game, you can use the red-backed VP cards as well, which we left out in this example game. And don't forget, there's another side of the board you can play on, and its first turn rules and any special features are explained on these 2 pages of the rulebook. For a more advanced setup, you can also read these drafting rules here to allow players to have more choice over the bonus point cards they might end up with. And there are also solo rules, but those I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Maglev Metro. If you have any questions at all about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.